This is Access 2016, Module 5, Part 15. We're going to be looking at data validation rules. And similar to working with data validation in Excel, we are trying to ensure that valid data is going to be entered into our fields. We have two types of data validation rules that we will be looking at. The first one is a field validation rule, and in this we are only checking one field. We will also be looking at a table validation rule where we will be comparing two fields within the same table. A few things that you need to be aware of. The field validation rule, you have to select the field in design view of the table, and then go to the bottom of the screen where the field properties are and enter the rule in the validation rule there. You will see in a few minutes that there will be a spot for a validation rule as well as validation text. And the text is going to be the error message that appears if they violate the rule. Field names are not needed in the rule when you're working with a field validation because you've already selected the field at the top of the screen. Now, table validation rules compare two fields within the same table. So we will be opening up the table properties, which will open up at the left side of the screen. And in that area, you do need to put square brackets around the field names and use them in the rules because it needs to know which fields within the table you're trying to compare. You will also have a validation text available in the table properties that will be displayed as your error message. So let's go ahead and get in and take a look at these. So to do our first one, which is going to be a field validation rule, we are going to open up the billing table. Our first rule is going to be that the invoice amount must be greater than 5. We don't bill the customer unless it's more than $5. So let's go to Design View. And in order to enter a field validation rule, the first thing you have to do is select the field in the top portion of the Design View. So I clicked on Invoice Amount. And now I am going to go down to the bottom of the screen in the field properties, and I'll find the validation rule. I've already told it that I'm looking at the invoice amount by clicking on it up here. So I do not need to use the field name. I just need to type greater than 5. Next, I would put text in the validation text. This is going to be the error message that will appear if the rule is violated. So we are going to say invoice amounts must be greater than 5. You want to be very careful with typing on these messages, especially on exams and homework. Typing errors will cause you to lose points. So I'm going to go ahead and save the file. And now it says, wait a minute, data integrity has been changed. You've added a new rule. Do you want me to test the rule? So if you say yes, what it's going to do is it's going to look through all of the records that are already in this table and make sure that they all have an invoice amount greater than 5 so that they do not violate your rule. It does tell you it may take a long time, but that's only if you have a lot of records. None of the tables we work with in this class will be large enough that this will take a long time. And it's already done. So let's go ahead and switch over to Datasheet View so that we can test our rule. So I'm going to go as if I'm editing this record. I'm going to tab over to the invoice amount, and when I hit 3 and hit tab, as soon as I try to leave the field, I will get an error message if I am violating the rule. So you want to make sure that the error message pops up. If it doesn't, you should go back and look at your rule and see if perhaps the sign is backwards or there's some other problem with it. Perhaps you put it on the wrong field. That happens quite a lot. Okay, I'm going to hit escape. That will turn the information right back. And what if I changed it to 75? Notice, because that is greater than the 50, it will allow me to change it. So I am going to change it back. So you want to make sure if you put in a valid answer that's greater than, that it will accept it. But if you put in a smaller number, it will not. You always want to test these rules. If it is a field validation rule, you should get the error message immediately upon exiting the field. Now, when you see the error message, will be a little bit different when you're looking at a table validation. So with a table validation rule, what we're going to say is that if there is an insurance amount, okay, so insurance has to be less than or equal to our invoice amount. We're not going to take more money from the insurance company than we charged the customer. So let's go back into our design view. And since this particular rule is affecting 2 fields, you need to open up the property sheet. You'll see the button for that on our ribbon, and it opens along the left-hand side. You can see here that we have a validation rule and validation text. We're going to put in square brackets the first field name, which is insurance. Once we see it pop up, we can click on it. Insurance is less than or equal to, and then we're going to do square bracket, invoice amount. Notice both fields are required as part of the rule. You're putting a logical expression in as to how they compare to one another. And now the validation text is going to say insurance coverage cannot be larger than, whoops, there's a spelling error, larger than the invoice amount. Now we're going to go ahead and save this. Again, it's going to check, so we say yes. And now let's go in and test this rule. So we'll go to the datasheet view. So we have an invoice amount of 50. So let's see if we put in an insurance amount of 75. And you'll notice as soon as you go to change the record. Now it's a little deceiving with these two fields since this is our last field in the record on the table. A table validation rule is checked when you go to leave the record. So if insurance amount had been in front of the invoice ID or item ID, you still would not have gotten the error message until you went to go to the next record, either by hitting the down arrow or by tabbing through the rest of the fields. Okay, so a field validation rule, it checks as soon as you leave the field. A table validation rule is checked when you go to leave the record. So we got an error message, so I'm going to hit escape. And let's try it again on another record. I'm going to come down here, and instead of changing my invoice amount, I'm going to lower, or my insurance amount, I'm going to lower my invoice amount. So I lowered that, and notice I get that error message as soon as it tries to leave the record. You always want to make sure that you check and test your validation rules. You don't want to have a rule where you've put the sign backwards, but because you forgot to check it, you didn't catch that, and therefore you're losing points for a simple mistake like that. So again, I want to refresh your memory. Field validation rules, those are going to go, if we open up our table into design view, field validation, you click on the field and you come down to the bottom of the screen. Field names are not required because you've already told it what field it pertains to. And when you test it, you will receive the error message as soon as you try to leave the field. Table validation rules are comparing two fields. They are going to be in the table property sheet, which is going to show up on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll notice the field names are in square brackets, and this test does not occur until you try to leave the record. So once you try to go on to the next record, that's when this test happens, and it will give you the error message at that point.